Hi, I'm Karen Kugler. I am one of the designated prosecutors to the Ramsey County Attorney's Office sexual assault well, response team, essentially. We call it START. It's sexual or sex trafficking and assault response team. And my role within that team is to work with investigators to create a comprehensive investigation so that we can get some of these harder cases charged. I also have a directive from John Choi to very aggressively charge some of the more difficult cases that would have in the past been not charged. And I also do a lot of training around crim sex and best practices with attorneys as well as investigators and SANEs, etc. So anybody basically in this world that needs training or wants training. So that's my job.
My name is Crystal Jones. I'm the sex crimes detective with the Roseville Police Department. I've been a police officer here for 7 years. I've been the sex crimes detective for about 2.5. My position was actually a new position when I took it over in mid 2018 because we were able to get funding from the Ramsey County Attorney's Office and a grant that they had in partnership with Avawi to basically fund additional investigations or resources or whatever was needed. And so my position was a new position that was funded entirely by that grant in the year 2020. And then the Roseville City Council decided to continue funding that new position through the rest of however long it's needed, based on the caseloads and the amount of time that these cases and the complexity that these cases take to investigate. So originally it was a joint detective spot that covered both sex crimes as well as family and domestic violence, and the caseloads were astronomical. So they split it into two.
I'm Brielle. I am a criminal justice analyst in our office. I do a little bit of a lot of things in our office, data related. Also, I help with investigations after the fact if they need help following up with stuff. But specifically for the sexual assault START team, I'm in charge of collecting the data from the different agencies that we have determined to be important to collect, and pretty much do the statistics behind the scenes work with that.
My name is Pahua. I am currently the interim program supervisor at SOS Sexual Violence Services. So we are a sexual assault advocacy agency that helps victim survivors of sexual violence, including friends and families, and do a lot of other things as well. I'm not sure what you want to know about me. So I've been with SOS for about 6 years now, and been in this interim position since this year. So
my name is Jessica O'Hearn. I'm the sexual assault investigator for the Sheriff's Department. For 2 years, we had a grant with the County Attorney's Office, and we just got another grant this year. So we have another 2 years with a new grant, working also with the County Attorney's Office again. And I solely do sexual assault cases.
My name is Eva Morrison. I use she, her pronouns. So I've been with Ramsey County for a while. I actually formerly worked at SOS, where Pahua is the interim supervisor as an advocate. And I am in a newer position now that's very excited. It's related to the grant that Jessica just mentioned. So I am the sexual assault response project manager based out of the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. So I am coordinating some really exciting ongoing efforts that are actually countywide, so across all 9 law enforcement agencies, as well as with the county attorney's office, with really close partnership with our medical partners that do sexual assault exams, and of course SOS, sexual assault advocacy services. So doing a lot of kind of systems response improvement efforts. So how are we responding? How are we coordinating efforts collaboratively? How are we training our officers, our investigators, our advocates being invited to be at interviews with victims, all these different things. And so right now, I'm project managing specifically the goals of the grant that we just started in April of this year. One of which is really doing a much better job of including the input and feedback of victim survivors into the work and improvement efforts that we do.
I'm Dawn Baxt. I work in the Ramsey County Attorney's Office with Karen and Brielle. Karen, as she said, is our investigator, coordinator, superstar charger. After she charges cases, they come to me. I'm the trial attorney. I heard you chatting when I hopped on. So I have been the only designated prosecutor for the last almost 2 years since we formally implemented START. We just are thrilled to bring on a second prosecutor. So I take as many of the cases Karen charges as possible, but there are more than one prosecutor can handle. So having another one will be tremendously helpful. The spillover right now goes to other prosecutors that are trained to handle crim sex cases, but we have a really specific approach. And so kind of keeping those nice and tight and within our group is our goal.
So two and a half years ago, well, more than that, even give you the full history, she's got it locked down. But, you know, there was a full study done on what was needed in terms of more aggressively and appropriately handling the crim sex cases in Ramsey County. And out of that came, you know, the need to have a designated prosecutor or prosecution teams that they provided some great funding to help kind of initiate that. And with that, we were also able to get Eva through SOS on board, and Jessica O'Hearn was also funded by that grant. Since then, well, and then in conjunction with that, our office specifically helped out with Roseville to fund Crystal's position, as she said. Since that time now, Ramsey County pays for my position, has been approved by the board. So I'm no longer grant funded. I was originally, but that was that's changed. So my position's full-time, Dawn's position's full-time in terms of Ramsey County not being grant funded. Our new prosecutor we just added on to our team, Soma Yarni is her name, and she is grant funded under the current grants. So should it always be paid, you know, should we always just as a county be able to cover that? That's the ideal, certainly. And we have been able to do that through time. But with the extra work that we're all doing, the needs have arisen, you know, it just grows, it continues to grow. So the grant funding is a great backfill to help us create these positions. And then the county's been wonderful in bringing them on full time.
I can talk about that. I think there's just an increase overall. Our case levels have been going up year after year and they're not stopping. So I don't know if it's one gender, but I think overall everything's going up.
And I would say also that I'm not really sure if the cases have necessarily been going up in that aspect, but we've had a lot more cases being reported, sexual assault cases specifically being reported by especially female victims in probably the last 5 years. And I think a lot of that is due to the Me Too movement and just a lot of changes that we've had in policy and practice on how police and investigators are responding to sexual assaults. I think a lot more victims are feeling confident moving forward, knowing that we're taking a stance of beginning by believing and offering advocacy and really helping them through the process instead of, you know, disbelieving, shutting them down, making them feel, you know, like victims. We're really supporting them. And that's made a huge difference in, they tell, you know, their friends or they tell their family members, and those potential victims are more confident moving forward with the process as well and reporting to law enforcement on the front end. But I have seen within our department, our policies, our practices change on especially the patrol officer's initial response to a sexual assault report. And so at the beginning of my career, which was only 7 years ago, it was taking, a patrol officer would respond to a sexual assault and take the report just like they would any other report, whether it was a burglary or, you know, a domestic assault or anything. There wasn't a lot of human element behind that report taking or offering resources. It was, let's get the facts. We need to know if this case is chargeable. We need to know if we have probable cause to make an arrest. And it was just very structured on, I need the who, what, when, where, and why, and that's all I want. And that has radically changed because we have incorporated a lot of information, a lot of training, a lot of research into trauma and how victims who are reporting sexual assaults have been traumatized, and how sometimes people's reactions to being sexually assaulted are not what you would expect, and how those reactions are normal, and we shouldn't have a one size fits all to what we expect a victim of sexual assault to do or to say or to react like. And so we're learning that every victim responds differently to being assaulted. We're learning that their individual responses are related to being traumatized, and that's just psychology based, and we can't read into that. We're learning that the Begin by Believing campaign has been huge in being able to help our officers really feel like they are doing everything that they can for that victim, not necessarily sorting out who's telling the truth and who's not, but really taking that statement as a true statement and working on that information. So it's just, I think the mindset within our police department has drastically changed because of that. And we've started to really focus on training about trauma informed and victim centered interviews, resources, things like that. I mean, there's just so much that has gone into it, and that's changed since I became an officer 7 years ago.
We also now have also integrated where after the patrol officer takes the report, the investigator, and it's usually me, I have another personnel that's helping because we've had so many cases, but we have 24 hours to follow up with the victim. So they get to talk with an investigator within 24 hours, and we set up the meetings usually within a day or two. And then from there, after we work our caseload, now we have a specialized prosecutor we can go to, where before it was very hit or miss on who we could talk to about these cases. So now we have a specialized prosecutor, Karen, that I can talk to any day or night. And usually my cases, once I submit them, they're done within a few weeks, months. She lets me know yes or no for charging, where before with the county attorney, I had some stuff sitting months upon months waiting for charges. So it's a lot more victim centered now all around for law enforcement, I believe.
Data wise, Karen, who Karen mentioned earlier, she had conducted a study from 2013 to 2016 for a sampling of the sexual assault cases that were both referred and not referred to the county attorney's office for charging. And from that systematic study, we have found that there were certain points that we could improve on. So one of them was, like Jessica said, about making sure we contact a victim within 24 hours of getting that report, so that we make sure that they know that we're working on this. So there were different data points. So we have now determined that there are certain data points that we want to make sure that we are improving on. And so we are collecting data from each agency systematically as a whole, so that we can see how we are doing over time as this team moves forward, to make sure that we are hitting the things that we agreed to the community to do. So we collect all of those, their checklists, and so we collect those from the agencies on each case, regardless if they refer it or not, so that we understand the steps that were taken in each case moving forward.
Yes, Ramsey County is ahead of the curve in a lot of this stuff. And, you know, I think from work that I do now and previous work working with a lot of other folks that do kind of multidisciplinary coordination efforts across the state, I think a lot of the efforts that we undertake are pretty novel. I mean, I think one of those is that we really coordinate on a countywide basis. In a lot of other counties, you see different jurisdictions, different law enforcement agencies really like doing their work, but kind of in their own lanes. And in Ramsey, we are significantly more collaborative than I see in other places. And one of the benefits of that is, you know, in any given county, you're going to have, you know, your bigger agencies, you're going to have your sheriff's department and, you know, St. Paul Police Department, but then you're going to have these little itty bitty guys in there too. And so when you pool your resources and you come together the way that we do, and you make commitments to improve on a countywide basis, you're leaning on each other, you're sharing expertise, and you're sharing a lot of those resources so that the benefits can really be spread across the county versus folks who maybe have 1 to 2 investigators for all of their cases would not have. And so I think that's a way that we are really ahead of the curve. And we also have, quite frankly, some incredibly dedicated leadership. I mean, John Choi is a remarkable advocate for improving the way that we respond to sexual assault. And it is so sincere, and he puts, you know, his resources and his time behind that. And when he says that he wants to make the criminal justice system better for all people and for all survivors of sexual violence, he means it, and he really puts the work behind it. So having that leadership who is really at the forefront of saying we need to make this change, everyone come to the table and let's share what we need to do to make it happen. I mean, that is, I think, very unique to Ramsey County.
Specifically within Ramsey County, we've made sure that every single patrol officer has been specially trained on how to handle criminal sexual conduct reports. And so they get that trauma-informed, victim-centered training. All patrol officers have gotten that. Investigators certainly, but having that appropriate victim response is so critical on that first contact with law enforcement, that we've made sure that everybody has been specifically trained on how to deal with it. And they also all have individual cards that basically give them information on what they should be addressing and what they should be doing. With that too, we've also, focused on those counterintuitive behaviors that officers just are not used to. When they're asking a victim question and it seems like the victim's all over the place. In the past, they've thought that the victim's lying and they're not being truthful because they can't tell me that linear progression of what happened. Or maybe they'll say it one time and then they'll add some facts the other time. And in the past, we would have seen victim, in this officer's impression, is fabricating or could be, making this up. And that's 100% not true. It's a trauma-informed response or a counterintuitive behavior. And so having those officers understand that on the front end has been critical. And then having the investigators also all have that training, plus they have more intensive training that they're expected to do on criminal sexual conduct cases. And now we're implementing mentorship and shadowing among some of the, as Eva called them, itty bitty agencies. So the people that don't get it as much can shadow people like Jessica or Crystal or some of the St. Paul sex crimes investigators who do it more frequently, so they have a better sense of it, which in the past they would have been left out to their own devices.
I think it was when it comes to counter responses too, there are 11 different SMART teams, so they're sexual assault response teams essentially in Minnesota, and each county does look very different. So the dynamics of each county does look very different. Ramsey County is one of the most densely populated and racially diverse counties in Minnesota. And the Ramsey County Sexual Assault Protocol team has been around for 40 years. And I think it's been a buildup of all of the relationships and everything that's happened in the past that makes this team work so much more collaboratively together, and also having that leadership and buy-in from the top too. So I think that those are some of the things that makes Ramsey County unique in doing this work. We're in this space, we're talking about sexual violence survivors who have reported to law enforcement, and then if they even get through to their case being charged and going through the criminal court process, we also know that the statistics say that less than 20% of survivors even report to law enforcement. And so that's a huge population that we're not seeing. My recollection from the last time we pulled data is that the majority of the people that we serve have come in contact with law enforcement or have reported. And that's also because we have built more of that partnership and relationship with law enforcement. So one of the things, so even though we recognize that, you know, less than 20% will probably report, we also know that the people who do report oftentimes aren't connected to advocacy or just don't know about advocacy. And so that was part of the initiative that, okay, here's a population that we can target right now, that we've already got this team and these working relationships with. And so I think it was in 2017 that we started being more intentional about having advocates present at the investigative interviews. And so we have seen, you know, since we started implementing that and implementing that more into not just practice, but into protocol, that we've seen more victim survivors getting connected to law enforcement. So, you know, that's why our numbers kind of look the way they do. But we also know that, you know, when it comes to the racial demographics, the majority of the people who we do know their race are people of color, BIPOC communities. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but again, I can share that with you later. And I think that really does speak to the importance of having a trauma-informed system that also recognizes the experience of BIPOC communities. Because we also know, like, there hasn't always, historically, there hasn't always been a great relationship with law enforcement and communities of color. And so where everyone's working on it and recognizes. But having an advocate present has definitely helped victim survivors go through the process if that is what they want to do. So, you know, we're not here to tell them what to do or anything like that, but they get to make the decision and we're there to support them. And I know even people with, you know, I've worked with people from Roseville or had cases that at the sheriff's office, and they would often say, you know, if the advocate wasn't involved like that, they would not have ever gone this far with the cases. So the SMART teams are a multidisciplinary team that includes like advocacy, law enforcement, prosecution, corrections, and those are the funded teams. Basically every county does have a sexual assault advocacy agency that serves in that area. So we all do kind of similar work, but the work looks different in the metro area and then versus the rural areas.
With law enforcement, it's tough because there's a rotation that happens in a lot of agencies. And, you know, we've been super fortunate with both Crystal and Jessica that they've been in and they've been doing this work for a long time, which is really, really nice to have specific designated investigators on it, as well as in our office too, to be able to stay in a spot and stay focused on the work is really critical. A lot of agencies just don't have that flexibility and or support to keep doing that, or people just get burnt out. It's really, really hard, dark work. And as I was talking with you at the beginning, the human trafficking work, you know, I got out of it. I made this switch because it gets dark and it gets hard after a while. You just can only handle so much of that deep, dark life that you're living in your soul. So you got to kind of mix it up and do a switch. But there's a lot of transition sometimes that happens, especially in some of the smaller agencies, because it's just a process that they go through, and that gets tricky. I think that's tough. It would be nice if we could all just have one specialty, but it's not realistic. And so then you're constantly reinventing the wheel and retraining people.
You know, I just met with the county attorney's office. One of the, I think probably almost the very first case that I worked on. It actually started. The case was reported and the investigation was started by the detective that previously held my spot. And when I came on, it was kind of reinvigorated. That case is finally going to trial. And this is almost two and a half years later. And so just having that consistency with, you know, law enforcement and advocacy prosecutors it's crazy because these cases take a long time. And obviously COVID did us no favors in that.
very end, engagement is something that we have all become better at, both in our individual disciplines, but also collaboratively. As Crystal said, victims of sexual assault have gone through a very intimate violation, and they are cases that need to be prosecuted differently than others, right? So for a very long time, sexual assaults and the criminal justice system in general focused on penalty as sort of a metric for success. And I feel like all of us across the disciplines have learned over time that specifically, and even more so for sexual assault than other kinds of crimes, that what is ultimately successful, it can look lots of different ways, right? It is not the longest possible prison sentence for an offender. Sometimes it is, but there are all kinds of pieces that are necessary for these survivors to be made as close to whole again as possible. And so, you know, we talk all the time about resources that need to be made available. There are dependency issues and housing issues and training issues and family dynamics. There are survivors that are college students and just want to be able to go to class without seeing the defendant every single day. There are, you know, there are intimate violence. I have all kinds of cases where the survivors are homeless or living in hotels. So the advocates are the secret ingredient to success here, because they come in early, they know what survivors need, and they stick with it all the way through the process. The criminal justice system is incredibly frustrating for all lay people, right? But especially these kinds of survivors. It often takes a year or 2 years for a case to work through the system. And some survivors are able to sort of put this piece up on the shelf and go through their daily lives. Lots of them are not. This is all consuming all the time. And to try to carry that extra burden every single day while they are also trying to heal and take care of their children and go to work and all of the things is incredibly frustrating. So maintaining engagement is critical to get to the end of the criminal justice road, however that ends up looking. And part of what I think makes our model great is the combination of things people have talked about. John Choi is an amazing leader. He puts, he walks the walk and talks the talk. So his mantra to me is not go out and get convictions. It is not send people to prison. It is do what you can to define success in these cases. And so it's sort of, forward, backward, backward, forward. We do that on as many cases as we can. And then the community hears about what is happening on cases. The word trickles out that offenders are being held accountable. And so then the next time somebody's attacked, they are a little bit more confident in reporting, right? And so we are doing nothing smaller than shifting an entire culture. And so, I don't know as much what they do in other counties, but I'm pretty darn proud of what Ramsey County is doing.
In the words of Hillary Clinton, right? It takes a village. It doesn't just take a village to raise children, but it takes a village to support a victim of sexual assault. And it is from the SANE nurse to the advocates, to the investigators, to the prosecutors, and holistically and trying to support people who have been victims of crime. And like Dawn said, the end result can be a conviction. It may not be a conviction. They may not want that. Whatever we can do to help support them is just so critical. And I think that outreach piece is also so important. And that's something that we're really focusing on in this round of our kind of phase 2 of our work on this. We're reaching out into some of the underserved populations in educating and making sure that communities of underserved populations, such as the homeless, such as the mentally ill, working with various LGBTQ plus communities that don't necessarily always report, and trying to reach out into those communities so that they can all understand that it is safe to come forward and report if you've been sexually assaulted. And we will be here for you, and we will start by believing, and we will support you. So I think all of that is, just kind of that holistic approach and working together is so, so very critical.
I think one of the things that make, like I said, Ramsey County pretty strong is that we take such a team approach. I agree with Dawn that advocates are definitely like the secret sauce. It's definitely not because I used to be an advocate, but they are pretty amazing. But really, we really all have a seat at the table. But you asked, what's missing, what needs to happen still. And I think one of the gaps is that, we've got all these professionals at the table and everyone's seat is equally as important, which is new. But who has been missing from the table are the survivors themselves. And so with this newest grant that we got, we've said, we cannot do this, we should not do this without the input, without the feedback, without the guidance of the survivors themselves. And so that's a really big part of what we're looking to do now, is to fill in that gap and say, we can all talk about how this needs to be better. We can all come up with probably some great ideas of how to improve this process in the system, but that is through our lens. And looking at the people's faces that you see here, you could probably guess it is a primarily white lens. When you look at our groups, there are some professions, there are some disciplines that are pretty diverse. Shout out to SOS. They have a very diverse group of advocates, and that is phenomenal. You don't see that across the board, unfortunately. And so what we're looking to do is say, we need that feedback. We need to we need survivors at the table, and not having them there is doing them a disservice, and it's doing our own work a disservice. And so we are looking to, we're looking into possibly developing like a survivor advisory committee, looking to start doing surveys, looking to do, more like outreach with groups to really find out from specific community groups as well, because everyone's answer is going to be different. How is this system for you? Whether it's a community group that has, they do interact with the police or they don't. If you don't feel comfortable reporting to the police after you've been sexually assaulted, why is that? And so we're really looking to do that and break that down by, speaking to the Black community in Ramsey County, speaking to, homeless folks, speaking to all these different underserved groups, and really like get their feedback and invite them to the table where they should have been the whole time. But, we're doing it now, and I'm thankful for that.
And I would just say, from a law enforcement perspective, there is so much controversy about the purpose of law enforcement right now and the way that we do things. And I don't think that there's a single other issue within law enforcement that we agree on so prominently than the fact that sexual assault is not okay, and that it's important to investigate it, and that we're invested in seeking justice. And you're going to find that everywhere. I know that a lot of the traditional law enforcement perspectives, especially from some of our street officers, have not necessarily taken that perspective, and things are changing so that even they're getting on board, and our new officers that are just starting are learning an entirely different way to respond to sexual assaults. And so it's one thing that law enforcement everywhere agrees on, is that these cases are important and they should be taken seriously. And the cry that, victims of sexual assault have made throughout the nation, law enforcement is listening.
People not wanting to go to the hospital during the pandemic. So some of those things played a role in reporting, but I can say that 2020 was just as about equal in terms of 2019, which in a pandemic world, that's a little surprising probably to some of us here. Yeah. That we have asked law enforcement to send us all of their cases, regardless of the circumstances, because then we as prosecution are declining the cases and formally declining them instead of the discretion being in law enforcement hands. So there's also that. So more cases were probably coming in for that as well.
I can say from law enforcement, when I do my cases, I give the power to the victim always. I tell them at any time they can stop this process, and I walk them step by step as to what's going to happen up until I send the case in to get charged. And then I tell them once the case is charged, then it's the county attorney that you work with. And you can go from there and kind of, again, decide if you don't want to participate, then you talk with the attorneys. So I really try to at least give the victim a voice and what they want through our process.
The other thing I want to just mention too, that's been an issue that we are trying to figure out too. Obviously, there's so many different things that victim services could do, but not really. We can't really give them many options. Like when you ask, like, what else can I do? We aren't very informed in what those options are. I do know that different cultural communities will have their own different practices too. So I'm Hmong, and some people choose to go through like basically like a family civil court kind of mediation process too. And I mean, I can go through different, I can share more details later if you want to know more about what that may look like. But some families may choose to do that as an option to their like restorative justice piece. So we're trying to figure out what those options may look like also.
Yep. And I guess to Eva's point, the more we get survivors at the tables, the more we'll probably find out. So